Emily Levine, and I'm Executive Director of the Autism Society of Southeastern Wisconsin. And we are going to have a panel of parents and adults with autism to talk about their experiences in the IEP and how they felt included and how possibly schools can do better. So I'm just going to have everybody talk about yourself a little bit. I'll just introduce them quickly. We have Siobhan King, Eddie Kamara, Robin Halsowitz, and Sarah Jones. And Sarah's mom is here providing support for Sarah, Tina. So why don't we just go down, and you are going to share the mics, and you're going to have to bring them pretty close to your phone. And just tell us about your name, what city and school district you're from, if you're a parent, how old your child is, and then what was your first experience with a special education system?
Awesome. My name is Siobhan King. I'm from the Milwaukee Public Schools School District. I have 6 children, 2 with IEPs. And the first experience that I had was in 2009 with the whole IEP process. I can say I was numb when I was asked, could they have permission to do the assessments? And I really didn't know what was going on. So I was numb and fearful. But the more I went to the meetings, the more I did learn.
Good morning, my name is Eddie Kelson Kamara.
So what district and school?
Milwaukee Public School, Gansland.
And how old is your?
My son is 13 years old, and the first experience he's had an IEP all his life was birth to 3, and it was very new for me, but it went well. So I had a great experience, and being a single dad with very little support, his birth to 3 was, I might be in a minority, but it was excellent, and I think I've had very, very good experiences. So, yes, happy with the system. Yes, there are glitches. Yes, there are a few things, but I always give the benefit of the doubt to the people who are working with my child. I come from the assumption that they're doing that job because they like. Otherwise, they would not be there. So that's my first assumption. And then we'll go from there. So I've had good experiences, and always thank the people who are working with him.
My name is Robin Halsowitz. I'm from Milwaukee as well, Milwaukee Public Schools. I have 3 boys. My oldest, Joey, is 27. Then I have a 25-year-old, John, and a 17-year-old, Joshua. And all 3 of the boys are on the spectrum, different levels of the autism spectrum, but they're all on the spectrum. And I've been involved with special education since my middle son, who's a 25-year-old, has been 3. So it's been a long time.
My name is Sarah Jones. I'm from Brookfield. My first experience with the special education system was in 6th grade in middle school.
So how did your school invite you to engage in the IEP process? And describe how you prepared for each meeting, as well as how you participate in IEP meetings. You want to go first?
Yeah, no problem. So I initially had a conversation with Hezekiah's teacher, and she expressed her concerns about some things she was seeing. And then as that conversation went on, there was another conversation about having some testing done for Hezekiah, just to see where he is and how he's learning and how things are, what things are going to look like moving forward. So I was thankful for that teacher, and her approach was, it was very approachable. I wasn't offended. but she came in a very meek way of expressing concerns that she had for my son. Yes.
And then when you went to your first IEP meeting, did anybody explain to you the parent's role in the IEP team?
Yes. He had an awesome teacher at Elm Creative Arts, I won't forget it, off of 8th and Walnut. The process was explained. I still was not 100% understanding it all, Emily, but the process was explained. He had a real good support system there. That's what I can remember. I had a good experience with them explaining things to me and just starting to go home and just look up those things in terms that I didn't understand. Like, what is an LEA? It kind of went over here. Then I had to go home and look it up so I could understand what they're talking about, because I didn't go to school for special ed. They're the experts.
So how did your school engage you in the IEP process, and how did you prepare for IEP meetings?
His first IEP, I sat and listened and listened and listened, and I was a teacher. So I was teaching high school, and when he was 3, we had his first IEP, and I was just like, oh, okay, I just listened and again assume they want the best for him, and that's what happened. I still remember his teacher when he was 3 and went to school for the very first day. She sent me pictures home, which I still have, and look at it, and it was great. So, and then from then on, the IEPs have been great. I asked for the IEP prior. Sometimes I hear people who have experiences not getting them for such a long time. I usually get them next day, 3 within a week, if the IEP is further down the road. So the experiences have been good. When we sit, participation is great, and I usually tell them what I would like. And if they're not able to, we meet in the middle, but they're receptive to the ideas and suggestions that I make, and how I would like Eden to have things done. So I've had, again, good experiences with his team. So he's been at same school, 1st grade, and now to 7th grade. So there's continuity there too. So that's important when you know the people you are working with. So again, I'll stress that I've had good relationships with the people who are working with my son. And yes, sometimes I want more, but I also understand that the resources are not always there. So I have to be able to, to see that part of them. Being a teacher also gives me a perspective, which I was a teacher for 8 years. So it makes me understand that, yes, sometimes you want to do more, but you are not able to do it. So.
My experience, the very first one, was a lot different than theirs. So when John was 3, he was involved in a birth to 3 program. And the school psychologists and those came and observed him in the birth to 3 program for early childhood special education. And we had no clue at that point. I mean, this was all new to us because my oldest son wasn't diagnosed till after my middle son was. So it was kind of like, okay, we were counting on them knowing what they were doing. And we were not informed of our rights. And the first IEP, my husband and I were talking last night about how we wish we still had that IEP as an example of one not to write, because they had goals on there that this was a kid who was totally nonverbal. He had not spoken a word. He made sounds, and they had on his IEP for him to verbally identify the classmates. And And I'm like, okay, they know what they're doing, you know. So through the process, we learned a lot. And so now I've learned one thing that I do to prepare for IEP meetings is I review the previous years. I make notes, I underline, I highlight things that I feel needs to be changed, things that I feel he has met those goals, and maybe the next level of goals need to be written. We formulate a list of questions that we want to make sure are answered at the IEP meeting. And then during the meeting, you know, I make sure that if something is not addressed, I bring it up. Because I've learned that that's, as a parent, that's one of the rights is, really, frankly, I believe the parent is the most important person on the team besides the child themselves. Because we know our kids better than the school does in some cases. So I make sure and speak up, and which is something that I have learned through the years to do.
So when I was preparing for each of my meetings, basically what I would do is like I'd make a slideshow to show everyone, and it includes my interests, my likes, dislikes, and some of my favorite classes. And I made sure to include my strengths and weaknesses, and I focused mainly on trying to overcome the challenges I was facing, such as like talking to people or communication, and what steps I needed to do to like work on it.
Great. When you think of your experiences with schools over the years, who was your champion or who did you trust? For example, who understood you, your child, or your situation, and was someone you felt you could go to for anything? And give an example about why you trusted them.
So I first want to talk about the initial experience with Hezekiah receiving an IEP. You know, that went well. That was still a learning process, but it wasn't always sunshine. So there were some bad experiences that I had at meetings. Some teachers that we weren't in agreement with, you know, whatever he was working on in the process. But I can say now that there is a particular teacher that comes to mind, and she was a special education teacher, and she was truly a champion. She not only communicated with me before the IEP and after, she communicated throughout the whole school year. She emailed resources, especially when this PTP started, and Hezekiah likes to work with his hands, so she intentionally would email resources for apprenticeships. And so she was his champion. She went and talked to his regular ed teacher. She was always in communication with me. She told me when Hezekiah was doing well and when he wasn't, and when he was making bad choices and when he wasn't. And so she was Hezekiah's champion. That's those are the experiences that I recently had with him, but they haven't been all peachy. But I'm thankful that I've had more good than bad.
I have appreciated all his teachers, so I'll speak well about all of them.
Is there one person that stands out as a champion for
I don't know. I don't want to take away from the others because I think they all have done, have done a good job. I'll mention, I am at his school so much. Some of the parents are like, "Do you teach here? You work here?" And I'm like, "No, I just volunteer. I help, however much." And sometimes the teacher is like, "We don't need to have a parent-teacher conference. We have one every day."
Yeah.
Because we talk, we communicate, and I think that's important. If you communicate with your kids' teachers, it makes things a whole lot different, easier. And last year's teacher, I'll give him a little bit more. As the first year, he had a male teacher. And it was great. Not that Miss Renee or Miss Johnson were good, they were great. They showed me pictures when he was 5. I was looking at pictures and look at, I mean, he was so little, and now he's 13, and he had a Mr. Jasty last year, and it was great. It's just the atmosphere, the classroom, the way things were done. Not saying again that past years weren't great, but it's just like, I wish he had him again this year, and he didn't, and I felt a little teary-eyed, because it was just like, yes, he'd come home and things were great, and he'd speak about it and do things, and he's verbally, limited, but he's able to. So I wanted to continue with the teacher he had last year, but again, yes, he made, great strides, and maybe that's why I was being selfish and wanting that. So.
Sure. Siobhan just wants to add.
I just also wanted to add too that Hezekiah did speak on that teacher, she understood him, that she got it. So I don't know what she did differently. And she was an African-American teacher, that doesn't mean anything, but I don't know if there was a cultural thing going on, but I just want to point that out, that he said that she got it.
So I too could have listed a whole bunch of teachers, but the one that I kind of came to mind immediately was my middle son John's middle school teacher, and we were blessed that during his high school years he moved up to the high school, so he had him again, which we were thrilled with. But what made him different was he made a point of getting to know each child, what their likes were, what their dislikes were, what their triggers were, what helped when a trigger happened. And he not only established that relationship with the child, but he also established that relationship with the parents. Did a lot to try to communicate from home to school. He would have a sheet that we would fill out, about what, because John was pretty much nonverbal. So what did he have for supper? What activities did he do? Was there any issues that he needed to be aware of? And so then he used that within the classroom, and they talked about that, and he would bring up to the child about, oh, last night you had spaghetti for supper, and so just building that relationship, and really encouraging parents to be a true partner in their child's education. And so because of that, I had full trust in him, that what was happening in the classroom was the best thing for my child. And I could talk to him about anything family related or child specific. And so that's really was so important. And when he started with this teacher, I wasn't afraid every time my phone rang and I saw the school's number, because he would call, yes, when there were issues, but he also called when there were gains, when there were good things that happened. So it wasn't just all negative.
I hear you on that phone ringing thing.
Yeah.
That was not a good sign usually. Sarah? Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Not this one.
Do you have a teacher that was a favorite,
It
or?
wasn't like a specific person, so really.
Okay. And this one is for the parents. So some people believe that not all families care about education. Sometimes you hear that parents don't want to be involved, or that certain parents aren't capable of participating in child's education. And have you encouraged people that share that belief, and how did you wrestle with that? How did you address that?
So working in the schools, I have heard comments about all the parents, just don't care, they're not involved. So I try to reframe what I really like to say is that it's not fair to say that about families, because you really have to look at, try to be optimistic and look at it from a perspective of, are you looking at the whole picture? Does a parent have a disability? That may be a barrier to them being involved. Does a parent have a mental health diagnosis? Of course, we would know that information, but just being a thinker on that level. Are there any barriers? Is the family homeless? These are not excuses, but these are things to actually look at that may be a barrier to parental involvement. Has the parent had a bad experience at the school? Is the school culturally sensitive? And so once I start bringing up these things, and it's like, well, oh yeah, you do have to look at it. Because it's so easy to point the finger and say, oh, 10 families only showed up for parent-teacher conference night when we're looking for maybe 50 to 60, but okay, well, what can we do? It's when there's not a huge amount of parent involvement, we need to put our thinking caps on and be solution-based and see what is going on and what can we do to increase engagement. Because they may not feel welcome.
Mm-hmm.
So this is about some beliefs that you sometimes hear at school, that not all families care about education, that not all families want to be involved, and have you encountered these types of beliefs, and how did you combat them?
That's a loaded question. I work in family engagement. I have great colleagues, wonderful boss, so I love it. I don't know. Oh.
Yep.
You're hiding. And I'll say that, yep, honest opinion or just a camouflage one.
Honest.
There are some who don't care. There's a Uber at your door with breakfast inside. All you have to do is get out, get in the car, and come in. You still want me to come get you out of bed. You know, I'm just going to leave it at that. Yes, 90%, care. As a parent, you can do a little bit more. But today, you can say anything. You're insulting, or you're doing this, or you're doing that. You cannot disagree with someone. You're automatically, I don't know. So I'm just going to end while I'm ahead.
Yeah, Siobhan wanted to add another thing.
I also wanted to bring up the barrier if the parent actually has a high school diploma. So I know it probably may sound like I'm looking at barriers. So there are parents that have not graduated from high school, and of course they haven't pursued a secondary education. And so with that being said, education may not be that important in their household as someone who has a bachelor's or a master's degree. Yeah.
One thing that I'll do is kind of turn the question around and ask, is it that they don't want to be involved, or have they not been encouraged or educated on how to be involved? And it goes back to, all the barriers that Siobhan had mentioned about, their own baggage that they bring with them day in and day out. But what is one of my things is I've heard teachers say, well, the parents don't care, so why should I care? Why should I work so hard if the parents aren't going to be backing me up? And for me, that just feels like everybody is giving up on this child. Rather than the parents trying, or the teachers trying to figure out, okay, how can I get past the barriers and involve the parents? How can I educate the parents? How can I encourage the parents that it is it's a team. It takes a team to raise a child with special needs. It's not isolated in the home, it's not isolated in the school. And the bottom line, for me, it comes down to relationships. Goes back to the last question with that teacher. Why was he such a success? Because he made a point of building those relationships.
And this question is for Sarah. Oh, Tina, you want to?
I'm not on the panel, but I'm.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, also, I think sometimes what we found is that they were so helpful at our school to work around times, to be very flexible. So we'd heard from other parents, oh, they offered that time, I can't go. And the school was very good at saying, well, when can you go? What can, is it very early morning before work, after work? And even exceptionally, my husband was in Afghanistan and FaceTimed him in, to feel included for him. I mean, they really did everything to work, to be sure. And then and even looking at how did that absence affect, Sarah during that time. So really brought everything in. It was just excellent. So to be as, some parents, they just hear a time, oh, I can't attend, to really kind of pursue and, whatever time parameters you can work with it as a school, as much as you can is really appreciated. And to get, so for us, it was my husband and myself with Sarah, and that was very helpful too. So I just want to add that, sorry.
Thank you.
Did you want to say something?
And just to kind of add to that, my husband is a special ed teacher, so he does a lot of the IEP meetings over the phone with parents. So it may not be face-to-face. I mean, with technology now, there's a way to involve a parent in one way or another. So he does a lot of the IEP meetings by phone because the parents can't physically get to the school.
That's a good point. So students have a legal right to help plan their IEP and participate in the IEP process. And I just wanted to know if you understood that right when you were in school, and did you feel like your preferences and thoughts were listened to? And if you could give any examples.
So I think that the majority of my teachers truly gave me a say in my education plan and listened to me. Like, for example, if I wanted to change anything, like there was one time I didn't really think I needed the speech classes anymore for a while. And, well, in my opinion, they really listened and they took it out of my schedule. I'm grateful for that everyone was willing to listen to me and take my concerns and my ideas, like, seriously.
So one thing we always talk about is that a lot of times the IEP process is deficit-driven, and yet we want to encourage our students' strengths and nurture their interests and preferences. I just was wondering if you could give an example of how a strength of your child was used or highlighted in the IEP process.
Great question. My two teenagers, they open up the IEP meetings. And I'm sorry, but my mind's going blank with the form that I actually got from Wispy and Sherry Sila. They open up the IEP meetings and it talks about who they are, what's their favorite color, how many family members they have. So they're able to open it up and talk about their strengths and who they are. And so that's how our meetings go.
Mm-hmm.
My son has a speech impediment, so plus he's shy. So when we're in a room and all his teachers are sitting, he will smile. But he's been participating since he was 6. He doesn't stay the whole time, but comes in every little and introduce yourself. My name is Eden. And the voice keeps going down and down, because his teachers are looking, and everybody's focused on him. So, just a little bit, it's a process that has gotten better for him. Just everyone's looking focusing. So he introduced himself and stays, and he's able to understand minimal, but he understands what's being said, and then 20, 30 minutes, he's ready to leave, and then he goes back to the classroom. But just being there and trying to understand, and perhaps we don't know how much he understands of it, but the fact that he's there is giving him, you know, a little bit of that what he needs for later.
So I'm going to speak just on last year's IEP meeting, because that was the first year that we were able to, or that my son was willing to come into the IEP meeting. We invited him every year and he refused. And I'm going to put a shout out that we attended Yippee last year. And I think that's what made the huge difference. And if you haven't heard about Yippee, talk to Tim. But what was really neat to see is that when it came time, then they asked him, he was able to identify strengths that he had. And the fact that everybody took the time, because you only have certain amount of time and you got to get through all these forms, but they took the time to allow him to talk about his strengths. And then during the meeting, when they were sharing strengths that they saw, they talked directly to him, which was really neat. And you could almost see the embarrassment that he had, because they were saying so many positive things to him, but also you could see that he appreciated hearing those things. And then when they wrote the goals, yes, they wrote the goals with weaknesses in mind, but they included strengths. So for him, he has a limited amount of time that he can focus. So they have, but they also know that listening to his music and being able to watch YouTube videos is relaxing for him, and he loves to do that. So they wrote, we'll focus for X amount of minutes, or we'll work for X amount of minutes. I don't remember exact wording. And then he would get time to listen to music, or free time to be able to go on YouTube. So they built the strengths into the goals whenever they could.
So one of the things I was able to focus on for my strengths was that I was able to talk about improving my grades in school. And originally, they weren't bad, they were kind of average, but I improved them to the point that I was invited to the High Achievers ceremony, which basically just means that you get an award and you get to make I don't remember if you made a speech or not, for improving my grades a little bit each semester.
I'm sorry. But I remember Sarah really loved anime and was very interested in graphic novels. And the school actually found a book that talked about social interactions using this graphic novel. I mean, it was just very impressive. They found there was kind of an exclusive interest during a period with the anime and the graphic novels in general, and that they found this book and were using that to enhance communication. I mean, just went above and beyond to really look at a strength and an interest and how to use that to communicate. And I thought that was just fascinating. I didn't like the book actually very much. I don't know. But the fact that they went out to do that was very impressive. And also I remember during the IEP meeting, Sarah would be like, I've had enough, can I go back to class now? So also being able to focus for a while, and then also getting, people are staring too much, as all of you are, that that is, wanting to say, I've had enough, can I go back to class now? I don't want to sit here through this whole thing. And often will say afterwards, Mom, Dad, I feel like everyone's just talking around me. I'm not really included. And it's just easy. I think Sarah will say that often. I feel like everyone's talking around me and I don't understand what they're saying anymore. And tunes out and says, I really don't want to be a part of this. Can I just go? And they'd say, yeah, you can go back to class now. So I think being aware of that, except the gentleman mentioned that, his son doesn't like that attention so much, and Sarah has also said, I don't like everyone looking at me or, talking for too long. So I thought, just echoing that.
Okay, we're just going to wrap up now with, if you could have one thing you could add to the IEP process to make it more helpful or supportive?
I would say from experiences with my own children and attending other IEP meetings, I know sometimes the focus can be deficit. It would be great if everyone who was involved at the IEP meetings, including the parent, could just have an affirmation before they get started of the student. If they recognize just one thing about the student. Because there was a point when I remember my son, we had an IEP meeting and the teacher was just, she wasn't bringing up those strengths, she was bringing up a lot of weaknesses, and he was really beat down after the meeting. And so when you go to a meeting and it's about you and you're hearing all the deficits, your esteem level may not be that high. And so with that being said, it would be great if everyone at the table could have a little sheet of paper and write down one strength of that student, because that just uplifts them, and it's going to uplift them when they hear something, whether it's a goal or a deficit, affirming our students, because sometimes it doesn't happen.
One thing, if you could add one thing to the IEP process to make it more positive or supportive.
Again, I think my IEPs with my son have been very positive. I just remember perhaps the first one, he was very little, very few things he could do, and I think at age 3, he looked pretty great, and I don't think anyone is or would be able to tell where he was going to be now. So that IEP was like this. So they were not very positives. But again, when you're 3, regardless of disability, who knows? So and I think I remember it was like, you leave the room and you're like, I'm driving my car off the bridge. Because you didn't hear so many positive things. But now I think, I don't know, you can always ask for the sky, but is that realistic? I don't know. So things are good and what we've worked on and what I've asked. I think if they haven't been able to, they're at least like, yes, we're looking into it, we're doing it, how does this thing? And my son has speech therapy outside of school, and the speech pathology from school communicates with the speech from outside so they can get the best. So, those things make me hopeful, and, it's like, yes, the communication. So they talk and they give each other ideas on, what works best for him. So those little things, give you hope. So that's, again, I come from yes, they're doing it because they like to do it. So, that's asked, but if they don't provide, it's because they cannot provide. I want to think that way.
For me, one thing that came to mind is putting the I back in the IEP. And I don't want to offend anybody, and this is just a blanket statement, but there's so many, what I've found through the years is there's so many catchphrases that needs to be in the IEP, whether this comes down from DPI, from the school supervisors, from wherever it comes from, but it's almost like cut and paste. You know, this diagnosis, so this wording has to be here. And it takes out the individualized, you know, and so sometimes that really frustrates me because, yeah, it sounds really good, but that's not the child. And then the other thing, one other thing that I have is, and this is something that I've discussed with other groups, is the IEPs being able to be printed in the preferred language of the parents. If you have a parent that only speaks Spanish, you're giving them this document that's in English. What good is that to them? So that's one of my other soapbox things.
Sarah, there was one thing that you could have added to the IEP meetings. Can you think of anything?
I wasn't really sure to answer that one, sorry.
Tina, do you have any?
I do, okay. One thing is, I think this, I should know this, but when I wasn't going to be sitting up here, so didn't prepare. But for the IEP, I think they always have to have like a teacher, one of the teachers. Well, for one of the IEP sessions, they have the guidance counselor, which this guidance counselor, nice guy, but what she saw for maybe 10 minutes in a group. And so we really didn't offer any valid perspective to offer it to the IEP. So if it's like a scheduling issue that you can't get a teacher, just wait, because it was so wonderful to have a teacher, kind of like, I'm going to say like a disinterested party, who's attending there to say, oh, you know, when there were groups, you know, Sarah, I would have to ask a group to say, be sure you know you have Sarah in the group, because it's hard for Sarah to go initiate to be in the group, but could give such feedback that it was so helpful to hear this kind of disinterested party, in a way, as a teacher, yes, who Sarah had already been taking, you know, classes with, to really talk about what was Sarah's, not her grades, but what is the behavior, what are you seeing in the classroom that could either talk to a strength or a weakness in the IEP. And that was so valuable every time they had a teacher that could offer that, because sometimes the IEP teachers, it's a little bit different to say it was too positive. Oh, Sarah's doing great on that. Okay, you're getting that from that little, you know, 1 hour class in your IEP session, but how are you seeing that in the classes that she takes when she's not in the IEP class? So that was so valuable. And I'd say I'd really like that to continue and not have a guidance counselor or somebody that really can't speak to the strengths or weaknesses or the kind of the social skill sets that would be exhibited in classrooms. So I think that is so valuable and really important to continue. And I
John, you get the last word.
Yep.
You have to know this is, Sarah almost walked back out the store when she saw all these people. So this is just huge, probably anxiety levels at 10 walking in here. But she's here, so I'm just like, I'm so excited. So
Yeah.
Sarah's telling me the scale only goes to 7, Mom, so.
Bonnie, do you have any last?
Yeah, I attended an IEP meeting at a school, and the room was very welcoming. I know this is going to be at a school level, not a DPI level, but the room was welcoming. The room had, the boards were decorated with IEP phrases, and they intentionally had tables set up in the room with IEP and special education resources. Because it's one thing to assume that the families know that the resources are out there, but it's another thing to present something and be solution oriented. So that's at a school level. That would be up to the administration and special education staff to have that room set aside with those resources, because you don't know what you'll strike in the family that may read it now, that may read it later. That's it.
Well, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it.